I froze in the doorway, still holding the casserole I baked for my daughter. From the garage, her voice cut through, "She's not getting a dime." Her husband laughed like I was already dead. My daughter, the child I raised, fed, and gave everything to, plotting behind my back under my roof. I didn't walk away. I picked up the wrench. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. Elaine Porter didn't expect much that morning, just a quick drop-off. She'd made the tuna casserole out of habit more than sentiment, the same way she used to pack Melissa's lunch when she was too proud to say thank you. The streets of their suburban Columbus neighborhood were slick with melting snow, lined with salt-streaked mailboxes and plastic snowmen beginning to sag at the seams. Her boots tracked a faint trail behind her as she walked up the short, sloping driveway to the garage, which was half open like someone had forgotten to close it all the way. She didn't knock. They were expecting her, or at least, they should have been. Melissa had said, "Swing by whenever," and Kyle rarely paid attention to anything that wasn't in his whiskey glass. The house loomed ahead in neutral beige silence, but the garage, smelling faintly of gasoline and thawing cardboard, had always felt like a quieter entrance. Elaine stepped inside without thinking, casserole dish cradled in both hands, the heat from its foil-wrapped surface warming her palms through her gloves. Then she stopped. A voice floated through the air from somewhere just beyond the interior door, Melissa's voice, clear, crisp, devoid of affection. "She's not getting a dime." Elaine's body went very still. She didn't blink, didn't move. The casserole trembled slightly in her grip, and the scent of cheddar and onion drifted upward in a wave that suddenly made her nauseous. Kyle's voice followed. "We'll have it all soon enough. She won't make this hard." There was a pause, the sound of glass against glass, ice cubes maybe, and then laughter. Melissa's, high-pitched, familiar, foreign. Elaine's knees locked in place, her grip on the dish tightened, her fingers aching from the tension. They didn't know she was here. They weren't pretending. There was no performance, no cushion of civility, just the truth. "I'm telling you, the house alone is worth $350. Melissa said. "Once we're on the deed, we can flip it or rent it. Either way, it's better than letting her rot in it like some queen of the Rust Belt." Elaine's breath caught in her throat. Her eyes scanned the garage, searching for something to hold on to, something that wasn't ceramic and homemade. That's when she saw it, an old wrench lying on the edge of the workbench. It was thick with age and grease, the kind of tool she'd used for decades at the auto plant before the robotics came in and sent half her floor into early retirement. She'd used one just like it to fix Melissa's first car when her daughter had been too afraid to change a flat on the highway. She set the casserole down slowly next to a stack of winter boxes and reached out to grip the wrench. It was heavier than she remembered. The cool metal bit into her palm, but it steadied her. This was something she understood. It had weight, purpose, integrity, everything those voices inside the house lacked. More laughter drifted through the crack in the interior door. All she ever did was work. She doesn't know how to hold on to money, just how to make it disappear on casseroles and thrift store crap. Elaine's spine stiffened. Her jaw clenched so tight she felt it click beneath her ears. But she didn't speak. She didn't open the door or call out their names. She just stood there, holding the wrench, not as a threat, but as something to remind herself of who she was, of what she'd built, of what they clearly believed they were entitled to tear down. After a long, breathless moment, she turned away. The voices continued behind her like a faucet left running in another room. She didn't want to hear any more, but now that the words had reached her, they echoed in her bones with a permanence that couldn't be scrubbed clean. She stepped out of the garage into the cold. The wind had picked up, biting across her face as snow began to fall again, soft but relentless. Her boots crunched over the driveway as she walked back to the car, wrench still in hand, leaving the casserole behind without a backward glance. The diner bell rang with a sharp jingle, cutting through the scent of fried bacon and cinnamon rolls like a blade. Marcia Lane looked up from behind the counter, squinting as sunlight spilled in behind the woman who had just pushed through the front door. The place was half full, truckers nursing black coffee, a retired couple reading the Dispatch, two teenagers splitting pancakes at the window booth, but the room seemed to tilt a little when Elaine Porter stormed in. Her coat was still dusted with snow, her face was pale with cold and maybe something else, and in her hand, gripped like a hammer sent from God, was a steel wrench. Old, nicked, familiar. Elaine marched up to the counter without saying a word and dropped it. Clang. The wrench hit the laminate like a declaration. Marcia raised an eyebrow. Not surprised, but alert. She stepped forward, wiping her hands on a dish towel that had seen better days. Who needs fixing? Elaine didn't answer right away. Her shoulders rose and fell with the weight of breath she hadn't realized she was holding until that moment. She blinked. Once. Then pulled her gloves off slowly and slid onto one of the red vinyl stools. "Melissa," she said at last, her voice low and tight. Marcia leaned in slightly. That snake of a son-in-law finally rubbed off on her? Elaine looked down at the wrench. The grease still smudged her palm. They think I'm 1 foot in the grave, talked about my house like it was already theirs, called me soft, a liability. Marcia sucked her teeth. You're a hell of a lot of things, Elaine, but soft sure as hell ain't one of them. Elaine's eyes stayed on the counter, but her jaw flexed. The words from the night before replayed in her mind, she's not getting a dime. And though her body sat still, a storm twisted behind her ribs. I stood there listening like a fool, she said quietly. Felt like someone had taken a crowbar to my chest. Marcia didn't say anything right away. She just nodded, then reached behind her and poured 2 cups of coffee, setting one gently in front of Elaine. You built your life with these hands, she said, glancing at the wrench. Raised a daughter, bought a house, survived 2 recessions, a divorce, and a goddamn heart murmur without, asking for pity. Don't hand what you've built over to vultures who'd rather peck at your bones than wipe your tears. Elaine exhaled slowly. Her fingers wrapped around the coffee cup like it might keep her from floating away. I didn't want to believe she could be that cold, she said. You knew she could be, Marcia said gently. You just didn't want it confirmed. Elaine looked up at her friend then. Really looked. The lines on Marcia's face were etched deep with a lifetime of standing up behind that counter, of calling things what they were. No sugarcoating, no apologies, just grit and batter and backbone. I think I need to do something about this, Elaine said, her voice quieter now, but more certain. Something permanent. Marcia nodded once, the way she did when someone placed a to-go order she respected. You've still got time, Elaine. You've got time and steel and a whole lot more backbone than the 2 of them put together. Elaine's gaze fell back to the wrench. Her reflection shone faintly in the chrome edge of the coffee machine behind the counter. For the first time in over a year, her hands didn't feel like they belonged to a woman winding down. They felt like hands that could still build something, or tear something down if needed. She took a long sip of coffee. The bitterness steadied her more than the heat. The office smelled faintly of cedar and aging paper, clean, masculine, and deliberately unflashy. Elaine stood just inside the doorway for a moment, snowflakes still dissolving into her coat collar. The radiator hissed softly along the far wall, and classical music played low through speakers tucked somewhere behind a row of tall filing cabinets. Everything about the place felt solid and measured, like nothing here had ever been rushed or borrowed on credit. Harold Denton rose slowly from behind his desk, setting aside a yellow legal pad and removing his reading glasses with the kind of care that came from decades of precise work. Elaine, he said, his voice warm but restrained. Come in, sit down. You look like hell's on your heels. She managed a thin smile and shook her head. Not hell. Just my daughter. He didn't ask questions right away, just gestured toward the leather chair across from his own, then moved to the corner of the office to pour 2 cups of coffee from a thermos. No assistants, no interns. Harold had always kept things small and tight and quiet. Elaine settled in, clutching her purse in her lap like it might try to escape. Harold handed her the coffee and waited. She took a slow sip. I need to make some changes, to my will. Harold didn't blink. All right, let's pull it up. He leaned over to unlock the bottom drawer of his file cabinet, rifled briefly through folders, and retrieved a thin manila file with her name typed neatly across the tab. He flipped it open and scanned quickly. As it stands, he said, tapping a page near the top, everything passes to Melissa Porter. No conditions, no stipulations. Elaine nodded, her expression unreadable. Would you like to assign a percentage elsewhere? Add a beneficiary? She met his eyes for the first time. Number, I'd like her name gone entirely. Harold paused. Elaine's hands didn't shake, her voice didn't waver. I want to start fresh, she said, setting the coffee on his desk. Clean slate. No loopholes, no room for contest. For a few seconds, the only sound was the soft ticking of the antique clock on the bookshelf behind them. I see, Harold said finally, settling back in his chair. This kind of change. People usually come in red-faced, dramatic, full of rage. You seem surgical. Elaine folded her hands. Rage is for people who expect more. I'm past that. I just want to be deliberate. Harold gave a small nod, the corner of his mouth tugging upward like a man who found satisfaction in precision. He pulled out a fresh draft template from a drawer and began typing notes into a computer so old it still had a disk drive. Elaine didn't interrupt. When he finished the first section, he looked up again. Would you like to reassign your estate entirely or designate it into a trust? Elaine tilted her head slightly. What protects it best from manipulation? Trust, he said without hesitation. Keeps it out of probate. Adds an extra layer of control, especially if we assign a third-party executor. Then do it, she said. He returned to his keyboard, typing steadily. The click of the keys filled the room like the sound of something finally being locked into place. Elaine stood and began to pace slowly, her fingers trailing along the edge of his bookshelf, pausing at a brass figurine shaped like a scale. He called me soft, she said after a moment. Harold didn't ask who. He didn't need to. And Melissa? He asked. She laughed. He nodded solemnly, making a note on the margin of the document. When he finished the draft, he hit print, then walked to the small copier behind his desk and waited for the pages to slide out. As he gathered them into a crisp stack, he said, almost to himself, You'd be surprised how many people come in here thinking their last act is just paperwork. Elaine turned to him. Her voice was low but certain. This isn't my last act, Harold. It's just the first one they won't see coming. Elaine had never liked government buildings. Too many fluorescent lights, too much echo in the hallways. Everything smelled faintly like recycled air and stale coffee, like the people inside had learned to keep their heads down and their voices low, but today, she walked into the Franklin County Records office like she had a purpose, and that purpose was nobody's damn business but her own. A security guard nodded politely as she passed through the metal detector, her canvas purse tucked beneath her arm and a manila envelope gripped firmly in hand. She moved down the corridor with deliberate steps, scanning the overhead signs until she reached Suite 210, Property and Deeds. Behind the glass partition, a woman with short black hair and wire-rimmed glasses looked up and smiled the moment Elaine approached. "You're early," the woman said, her voice smooth and efficient. "I like that." Elaine let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Nina Ramos?" "In the flesh," Nina said, already standing to unlock the small door beside the counter. "Harold said you'd be coming. Said you were sharp and wouldn't waste my time. I like that too." Elaine gave a half smile and followed her through into the back offices, cubicles, file drawers, printers humming like background noise in a world that rarely paused. Nina led her to a quiet corner desk, already prepped with a thick folder and a stack of crisp documents marked with colored tabs. "This," Nina said, flipping open the folder, "is everything we need to make your trust airtight. Full transfer of the property out of your personal name and into the Porter Living Trust. Once it's done, no one, and I mean no one, can touch it without the trustee's authority." Elaine pulled out a pen without being asked. "Let's do it." Nina grinned. "I do love a woman who doesn't flinch." They moved through the documents page by page. Nina explained each line with quiet authority: ownership transfer, trust assignment, legal shielding, homestead protections. It was clinical, yes, but also empowering. Elaine initialed in all the right spots, her hand steady, her mind clear. The fear that had clung to her for the past 24 hours had been replaced by something sturdier, something she recognized. Control. By the time they reached the final page, Nina paused and looked at her more directly. "You sure about this?" she asked, not out of doubt, but protocol. Elaine looked her in the eye. "Melissa doesn't get the house, or the yard, or the porch swing I built with my husband in '88. She doesn't get to walk through my life and hang a price tag on it." "Good answer," Nina said, sliding the final form forward. Elaine signed it with a firm stroke. Nina rose from her chair and walked to the heavy stamping machine on the adjacent table. She slid the documents into the slot, adjusted the alignment, and brought the lever down with a clean metallic ch-chunk. The sound echoed like a verdict. "There," she said, placing the embossed documents into a new folder. "Filed, sealed, protected." Elaine stood slowly, her knees reminding her of every year she'd spent climbing in and out of factory pits. But her spine stayed straight as she took the folder. "I'll sleep better tonight," she said, almost to herself. Nina smiled. "That makes two of us." Outside, the cold slapped her cheeks with the familiar bite of Ohio winter. But for the first time in days, it didn't feel hostile. It felt earned. Her boots crunched over the sidewalk as she returned to her car, her breath forming steady clouds in front of her. She didn't rush. She didn't need to. Back home, she stepped into her kitchen to the smell of last night's untouched casserole, now cold and congealed under a sheet of plastic wrap. She opened the fridge, slid it inside without a word, and then walked back out the front door with the folder still tucked under her arm. Marcia was waiting on the porch next door, coat open despite the cold, holding 2 cups of cocoa like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Well?" she asked, nodding toward the papers. Elaine opened the folder just enough for the gold seal to glint in the afternoon light. Marcia let out a whoop that startled a passing squirrel. "Damn right you did." The roast chicken smelled like rosemary and butter and something performative. Elaine stood in the foyer of Melissa's house, removing her coat with deliberate slowness. The tile floor gleamed beneath her feet, overly polished and cold as a courtroom. Every piece of decor, every brass-framed family photo, every candle arranged like it was curated for a catalog, screamed of someone trying to prove they'd made it. Elaine had always found the place exhausting. Melissa appeared from the kitchen with 2 wine glasses and a smile stretched too tight across her face. "There you are. I was starting to think you'd flaked." "I said I'd be here," Elaine replied, placing her gloves in her coat pocket. "And here I am." Melissa handed her a glass of white wine, but Elaine didn't take it. Instead, she nodded toward the dining room and moved past her daughter without touching anything. The table was already set. 3 plates, linen napkins folded like hotel origami, and candles burning low in crystal holders. Kyle was seated at the far end, leaning back in his chair like he owned the place, tie loosened just enough to say he'd had a long day doing something important. Elaine pulled out the chair closest to the window and sat down, placing her hands in her lap. Melissa followed and took the seat opposite her, eyes flickering toward Kyle like a cue had been hit. "We've been talking about the future," Kyle said, lifting his wine glass and swirling it with a casual arrogance. "And we just keep coming back to one thing. Your house. It's got such good bones." Elaine raised her eyes slowly. "Does it?" "Mm-hmm," Melissa hummed, reaching for the salad tongs. "The layout's perfect for what we want. Just needs a little updating. You know, open up the kitchen, knock down that weird pantry wall. Nothing major." Elaine reached for her water glass and took a measured sip. The lemon slice inside bumped gently against her lip before settling again at the bottom. She said nothing. Kyle chuckled, mistaking her silence for approval. "We're not rushing you. Obviously, we just think it's smart to plan ahead. Estate stuff can get so messy, right?" Melissa gave a small, performative laugh. "And we're only trying to help. Honestly, Mom, it's kind of a win-win. We'd take care of the place, keep it in the family. You'd have less to worry about." Elaine placed her glass back on the coaster and folded her napkin in half across her knee. The silence stretched. Melissa tilted her head. "Don't make this difficult, Mom." Elaine looked at her daughter, really looked at her, and saw the years stripped away. The little girl with chocolate on her face, hiding report cards in her backpack, The teenager who slammed doors and cried for a cell phone she hadn't earned. The woman who now sat across from her, polished to a shine, but rotting quietly underneath. "I never said I would," Elaine replied softly. Melissa's smile faltered just for a breath. Kyle leaned forward, his voice low and measured. "We just want to be on the same page. That's all." Elaine turned to the window. Outside, the yard was crusted with a thin sheet of ice, the trees bare and skeletal against the fading winter sky, the same trees that stood in her backyard, miles away, untouched and quiet. She turned back and offered them a faint, unreadable smile. "I'll think about it," she said. Melissa visibly relaxed, but it was too quick, too easy. Elaine had seen better liars on the line at the factory. The rest of dinner passed in polite half-sentences and refilled wine glasses. Kyle made a joke about property taxes. Melissa talked about refinancing. They mentioned a Florida vacation, a second SUV. Elaine ate in measured bites, chewing each forkful like it might have strings attached. She didn't say another word about the house. Elaine barely touched dessert. The lemon tart was plated beautifully, sliced with a precision that spoke more to Melissa's need for presentation than any real hospitality. Elaine took one bite and set her fork down. The crust was too hard, the lemon too sharp. Across the table, Kyle poured himself another glass of wine. He didn't bother to offer her more water. Melissa had gone quiet for the last 20 minutes, sipping her drink with tiny, controlled movements, her smile now replaced by a flat line of suspicion. Elaine could feel it, how the mood had shifted from pretend warmth to palpable scrutiny. Melissa's patience cracked first. She slapped her wine glass onto the table with a sharp thud, liquid sloshing over the rim and onto the linen runner. "What do you mean, you'll think about it?" Elaine blinked slowly. She reached for her napkin and dabbed at the corners of her mouth with deliberate calm, as though her daughter hadn't just raised her voice over dessert. "I mean," she said evenly, folding the napkin in her lap, "exactly what I said." Kyle leaned forward now, hands flat on the table, voice coded in that managerial tone he always defaulted to when he thought someone less educated needed correcting. "Elaine, this doesn't have to be a standoff. You're not being reasonable." Elaine tilted her head slightly, as if observing an insect she'd never seen before. "Reasonable," she echoed. Melissa pushed her chair back from the table with a sharp scrape, standing now, arms crossed over her chest. "You're acting like we're trying to rob you." Elaine stood too, but not out of anger. Her movements were slow, precise, unrattled. She picked up her purse, slung it over her shoulder, and tucked the linen napkin beside her empty plate. "I never said that either," she replied quietly. Kyle's voice sharpened. "Then what are you saying?" Elaine paused, her eyes sweeping across the room once more. These pristine surfaces, this carefully curated life, the champagne-colored curtains, the fake fireplace with the gas logs, the untouched bookshelf filled with unread hardcovers. It was all artifice. Melissa didn't want her mother's home. She wanted a trophy. She wanted a cash-in. And she'd never hear herself say that aloud. Elaine gave them both a measured smile. "Thank you for dinner." Then she turned and walked toward the door. "Mom!" Melissa called after her, a flicker of panic cracking through the edge of her voice. "Wait a minute. We're just trying to talk this through." Elaine didn't stop. She opened the front door without needing help. The wind slapped her face, cold and cleansing. She stepped out into it like it welcomed her, pulled the door shut behind her, and let the silence fall like snowfall, soft but final. By the time she reached her car, her hands were warm. She didn't even realize she'd been clenching them. Back home, the house greeted her with quiet familiarity. She locked the door behind her, flicked on the hallway lamp, and walked straight to the file cabinet in the spare room, the one Harold had told her to use. She knelt, unlocked the bottom drawer, and pulled out the folder. The stamped deed was there. So were the trust papers, all perfectly intact, all perfectly hers. She placed the new copy she'd picked up from the records office inside and shut the drawer gently. There was no ceremony to it, no emotional swelling in her chest, just a long, slow breath out. She walked back into the kitchen, kicked off her shoes, and made herself a cup of chamomile tea. The quiet stretched around her like a blanket. No ticking clock, No footsteps overhead, no voices plotting behind thin drywall. Her phone rang. She answered without checking the screen. Marcia's voice crackled through, smug and delighted. So, how'd it go? Did the blood drain from their faces, or did it just shoot out their ears? Elaine chuckled softly, leaning against the counter. They don't know what to do with silence. Oh, honey, Marcia said, cackling, that's because silence means they're not in control. Elaine stirred her tea slowly, eyes settling on the old wrench still resting on the windowsill. Elaine didn't scream. She didn't gasp. She didn't even flinch when the shatter rang out like a gunshot. She just stood there, barefoot on the kitchen tile, mug in hand, as the sharp crack of breaking glass fractured the silence. A gust of cold air rushed through the front room, carrying with it the unmistakable hiss of wind through a hole that hadn't been there an hour ago. She took one step toward the sound and saw it, her living room window, busted wide open. The brick sat in the middle of the carpet, surrounded by jagged shards and a halo of broken dreams someone else had tried to hurl into her home. She recognized the rag wrapped around it, a dish towel striped red and white. Cheap. Probably from a bundle, probably Melissa's. Elaine set her tea down without a word. She found the broom and dustpan in the pantry closet, same place they'd always been. Her movements were steady, practiced. She swept the glittering glass into a neat pile, the bristles rasping softly against the hardwood. The brick she picked up with a pair of gardening gloves and set in the sink, as if it were just another thing she'd have to scrub later. The silence was different now, not peaceful, not private. It had been pierced. She reached for the phone, punched in the number for non-emergency dispatch, and explained what had happened. Her tone never rose. She didn't embellish. She told the woman on the other end that someone had broken her front window, that there was no note, no fire, no spray paint, just glass, cold air, and a brick that didn't belong to her. Within 20 minutes, a cruiser pulled up outside. The officer was young, polite, polished in the way fresh academy grads always were, respectful, but visibly unsure what to do with a 71-year-old woman who opened her door wearing slippers, and the kind of stare that suggested she had already handled worse. "Looks like they threw it from the curb," he said, crouching near the windowsill. "You live alone, ma'am?" "I do," Elaine said, "and I sleep like a stone." He nodded, scribbled a note on his clipboard. "These tracks in your drive, fresh, dual tread, probably an SUV. Didn't stay long, maybe just enough time to idle and toss." Elaine folded her arms. Not many people would throw a brick at a widow's window in February. The officer didn't comment. He took a few photos, bagged the towel for prints, though he didn't sound optimistic, and promised a follow-up if anything came up. She thanked him, shook his hand, and locked the door behind him. A few minutes later, the doorbell rang again. This time it was Marcia, wrapped in a long brown coat, holding a bag from the diner and looking like she could bite steel. "Let me guess," she said before Elaine could speak. "You didn't even blink." Elaine stepped aside to let her in. "You should have called me first," Marcia added, brushing snow off her boots. "Someone chucks a brick at my house, I want backup before the cops." "I had it under control." Marcia looked at the boarded window, the brick in the sink, and the pile of glass already swept and bagged. "Yeah," she said, "I see that." They ate reheated stew in the kitchen. Marcia talked more than Elaine did, about her diner's grease trap failing again, about the regular who kept leaving a 20 under his plate, about the kid she hired part-time who reminded her of Melissa at 16, back when Melissa still laughed with her eyes. Elaine listened, nodded, refilled their tea. Later, after Marcia changed into borrowed sweatpants and rolled out the guest cot in the den, Elaine sat at the kitchen table again. The night outside had gone silent once more, but it was a different kind now. Not solitude, not peace. It was the quiet that comes right before a reckoning. The wrench sat on the table beside her, cold and loyal. Elaine stepped into Harold's office that afternoon with a calm that unnerved even her. The brick incident had come and gone without ceremony, filed, bagged, boarded over, but it hadn't rattled her. If anything, it had clarified something. People lash out when they feel control slipping. Harold was seated at his desk, glasses perched halfway down his nose, flipping through a thick envelope when he looked up and waved her in. The office was warm, the radiator rattling like old bones behind him. She took her usual seat without speaking, setting her gloves on the armrest and crossing one leg over the other. "I heard from Melissa," Harold said, as he closed the folder with a sigh. "She accused us, really, of coercion." Elaine raised her eyebrows, amused. "Coercion?" "Said she believes undue influence was involved," Harold said, deadpan. "That I must have pressured you, or misled you, that your mental state might be questionable." Elaine gave a short laugh. Not mocking, just tired. She's always blamed others. When she failed her driver's test, it was the instructor's fault. When she flunked out of that marketing program, it was the professor's bias. And now? She leaned back in her chair and let the silence stretch. "She's cornered," Elaine added, "and cornered people get loud." Harold nodded. "Thankfully, I've been doing this long enough to know how to close doors behind entitled children. The paperwork's airtight. You were competent, clear-minded, and signed freely in the presence of 2 witnesses and a notary." Elaine didn't ask who Melissa had hired. She didn't care. Any lawyer who took that case was either desperate or foolish. "I want to leave something behind," she said instead, turning her attention to the brass lamp on his desk. "Something in writing, not legal, just personal. A letter dot." Harold nodded again, slower this time. "You want it included with the trust packet?" "Yes," Elaine said. "I want her to hear the truth, in my words, and I want you to deliver it after I'm gone, no sooner." "Understood." Elaine stood. "I'll bring it by once I've finished." Harold's voice was gentle now. "Take your time. Say what needs saying." She nodded and left, the door closing with a soft click behind her. Back home, Elaine took her time preparing a fresh pot of tea before she opened the drawer in the hallway and pulled out the thick stationery box she hadn't touched since James passed. It was ivory paper with a soft linen finish, paper for births, for obituaries, for things that mattered. She sat at the table with her pen, her tea, and the ever-present wrench watching her from the edge of the windowsill like a dog guarding the perimeter. The first line took the longest. The page remained blank for 15 minutes as she stared into it, considering what tone would last longer than anger. Not venom, not sarcasm. Truth. Her hand moved slowly as she began writing, cursive looping with deliberate weight. "Melissa, when you read this, I'll be gone, and there won't be anyone left for you to push or guilt or sweet-talk into undoing what's already been done." She wrote for hours. She didn't cross out a word. Each line came steady and unhurried, pulled from places deeper than disappointment. She spoke of sacrifice, not just hers but the ones her daughter had refused to see. She acknowledged love, not to offer it again, but to make its absence unmistakably clear. And in between the lines, she buried a lesson. What happens when entitlement rots into expectation? When she finished, she folded the pages neatly, slipped them into a matching envelope, and sealed it with a single press of her thumb. That evening, Marcia came over again. This time without a casserole or lecture, just presence. Elaine poured her a drink, handed over the letter, and sat across the table as her friend read it aloud. Marcia's voice never cracked, but her throat tightened on certain lines. When she reached the end, she folded the pages and looked at Elaine. "Damn," she whispered. "That'll hit her harder than any wrench ever could." Elaine smiled faintly, eyes fixed on the envelope. Elaine was halfway through deadheading the front rose bushes when she saw the SUV roll up. It was a glossy, dark blue Escalade, the kind Melissa had once bragged about leasing for image, even when Elaine had warned her about balloon payments. The car idled at the curb for a long moment before the passenger door cracked open. Melissa stepped out slowly, not dressed for confrontation but for control. High boots, a belted camel coat, sleek sunglasses that tried to hide what her posture couldn't. Her arms were crossed tight, but not from the cold. Elaine didn't stop pruning. She clipped another browned petal, careful not to cut the stem. "Mom," Melissa said, walking up the drive, "we need to talk." Elaine glanced at her watch. "I've got 5 minutes before I water the azaleas." "I'm serious." "So am I." Melissa took a shallow breath. Her voice wobbled just slightly. "You can't do this to me." Elaine looked up slowly. The pruning shears in her hand gleamed faintly in the morning sun. "I didn't do this to you, Melissa," she said evenly. "You did it to yourself." That knocked the breath out of her daughter like a slap. Melissa opened her mouth to reply but hesitated, then looked down at the driveway as if it might offer her a line. "We're in trouble," she said finally. "Me and Kyle. Financially." Elaine said nothing, just folded her arms, the shears hanging from one finger like a key to a door Melissa couldn't enter. "I didn't want to say anything because it felt beneath me," Melissa continued, voice cracking at the edge. "But the debt, it's eating us alive. Credit cards, the second mortgage, Kyle's failed investment. Everything's slipping." Elaine didn't move. "I thought we had time," Melissa said louder now. "I thought you'd come around like you always do." Elaine raised one eyebrow. "Come around to what?" "To doing the right thing," Melissa said, exasperated. "To helping your daughter. I'm not asking for millions, I'm just asking for the house." Elaine inhaled deeply through her nose, steady and slow, the way she used to when the line supervisor gave her overtime after a 12-hour shift. Melissa stepped closer. "Please, just the house." For the first time, Elaine saw the truth surface on her daughter's face. Raw, ugly desperation. Not the manipulative kind, not the well-practiced plea she'd used to charm deans and lenders and in-laws. This was bottom-of-the-well panic. Elaine didn't speak. She turned and walked back toward the porch, the pruning shears swinging gently at her side. "Mom," Melissa called after her, urgency rising. "I'm begging you. You won't even notice I'm living in it. You can stay. You can have the guest room. You can—" Elaine stopped at the steps and looked back over her shoulder. "No," she said softly but firmly. "I had a guest room. You stood in it every summer and called it quaint. You laughed at the curtains. You mocked my lamp. And now that it's valuable? Now it's a lifeline." Melissa's mouth parted slightly, but nothing came out. Elaine opened the screen door, stepped inside, and let it shut behind her. Inside, the house was warm and sunlit and still. She didn't even take off her coat before walking to the kitchen phone, the one with the long, spiral cord that stretched halfway across the counter. She dialed Harold's number by heart now. He picked up on the second ring. "Elaine." "She came," Elaine said. "To the house. Told me the truth this time." Harold waited. "She wants the house. Says they're drowning." "And?" he asked gently. Elaine looked out the window, where Melissa was still standing at the end of the drive like a woman who couldn't believe the door hadn't opened for her. Elaine's voice didn't crack, not even a little. "I want to change the will again," she said. "Cut her out completely." There was silence on the line, then the soft rustle of paper. "Understood," Harold said. The signature line was blank. Elaine stared at it for a moment, then reached for the pen Harold had placed neatly beside the folder. The tip touched paper, and with the same quiet resolve she'd used to fix engines, fold linens, and raise a child without complaint, she signed her name, twice, once to exclude Melissa entirely, once to name something greater. Harold watched without interruption. He'd prepared the documents as promised, airtight, final, bulletproof. The old will was voided. This new version assigned not a penny, not a possession, not a title or trust to the daughter who had already buried her mother in her mind. Instead, Elaine's estate would fund a local arts scholarship for girls like her who had dreams bigger than their wallets, girls who didn't need to inherit their future but were ready to build it. Harold gathered the signed pages, checked each line, then stood. "I'll have these couriered to the records office for certification. But if you want the seal yourself, you know where to go." Elaine gave a small smile. "I like seeing Nina's face when I make a good decision." Harold chuckled as he walked her to the door. "This one's ironclad, Elaine. They could throw every tantrum in the county courthouse and still walk out empty." "That's the goal," she said, stepping into the crisp late-morning light. At the records office, Nina was already flipping through the documents when Elaine arrived. Her eyes skimmed the trust amendments, then lingered on the new line. The Elaine Porter Rising Artists Fund. Nina looked up, eyebrows raised. "I knew you were good," she said, reaching for the official stamp. "But this? This is legacy stuff." The metallic chunk rang out as she pressed the seal down. It echoed across the counter like a closing gavel. Elaine took the copy with both hands. "Thank you." "For what?" "For being fast and for not asking stupid questions." Nina winked. "Only kind I know how to be." That afternoon, Elaine walked into the community arts center with nothing but an envelope and a story. Inside, the space smelled like sawdust and charcoal pencils and hope. A teenage girl was tuning a violin in one corner, another stood near an easel, elbow deep in cobalt paint. Elaine approached the front desk and asked for the program director. The woman who greeted her was young, eager, and stunned when Elaine handed over the letter and the check. "That's Melissa's old piano," Elaine said, nodding toward the donation line item. "It's been collecting dust in my den for 10 years. She never played it after high school, and now she never will." The director blinked, unsure how to respond. Elaine smiled kindly. "Don't overthink it. Use it. Let a kid who still believes in sound touch something that mattered once." The woman took the envelope with both hands, speechless. Elaine turned and left without another word. That evening, she and Marcia sat out on the back porch, bundled in blankets despite the chill, sipping bourbon and eating microwave popcorn out of a cracked ceramic bowl. Elaine handed her friend a glass. Marcia raised it. "To cutting dead weight." Elaine clinked hers gently in return. "To carving new ones." The stars had started to break through the dusky blue sky, one by one, blinking like they were just remembering how to be seen. "You know," Marcia said after a long silence, "it's funny. You'd think something like this would hurt more." Elaine shook her head. "The pain was in the waiting, the hoping, the pretending. The cut?" She lifted her glass. "I didn't even feel it." Marcia studied her for a beat, then nodded. "That's because you didn't cut your daughter, Elaine. You just stopped bleeding for her." Elaine didn't answer. She leaned back, let the cold air brush her face, and closed her eyes. Harold Denton removed his glasses, tilted his head back, and let out a deep, belly-shaking laugh that bounced off the paneled walls of his office. Elaine waited patiently on the other side of the desk, arms folded, lips curved in the faintest smirk. She knew what was coming. She just wanted to hear him say it. Harold wiped his eyes with a cloth handkerchief and looked down again at the letter spread across his blotter. "Elaine," he said, tapping a finger against the thick legal stationery, "I've been doing this for over 40 years. I've seen sloppier threats from third graders who got grounded." Elaine tilted her head. "What's the best part?" Harold grinned. "Hard to pick. The part where she accuses you of deliberate emotional cruelty for changing your will, or the part where she threatens to pursue full restitution of inherited rights." Elaine raised an eyebrow. "Is that even a real term?" "Nope," Harold said, pushing the letter aside. "She's bluffing. Either she found herself a cheap lawyer who doesn't know the law, or she wrote it herself. Either way, it's nonsense. She has no case, no claim, and no leverage." "Good," Elaine said simply. Harold pulled a fresh sheet of letterhead from his drawer. "Want me to draft a response?" "Make it clean," Elaine said. "Boring even. Nothing they can turn into a scene." Harold nodded, already typing. Later that week, the sun returned after 4 straight days of drizzle, and Elaine used the break in weather to start planting tulip bulbs along the side of the house. The dirt was still soft from the rain, fragrant with early spring. She knelt on the foam pad she'd kept since her factory gardening club days, pressing each bulb into the earth like she was tucking in something small and valuable. Marcia stood a few feet away, leaning on the rake she'd been pretending to use. "You know she's going to drive by again," she muttered, scanning the cul-de-sac like a hawk. "She's not built for letting go." Elaine didn't look up. "That's her problem." "She's desperate," Marcia said. "Desperate people are either reckless or pathetic, sometimes both." Elaine reached for another bulb, brushing dirt from her glove. "Then let's hope she figures out which one she wants to be before the sheriff does." They worked in silence after that, Marcia raking nothing in particular, Elaine pressing her palms into the warm earth. Then, right on cue, the escalade. It came around the bend too slow to be casual, but too fast to be confrontational. Melissa sat behind the wheel, sunglasses on, jaw tight. She didn't stop, didn't wave, just glared through the tinted glass like she was driving past a crime scene. Elaine hummed to herself, steady and sweet. An old song, something from the radio back in '72. She didn't lift her head, just kept working, her hands dark with soil, her back straight, her tulips spaced perfectly apart. Marcia flipped the rake and dragged it once through the gravel like she was daring Melissa to stop. The SUV disappeared around the curve and didn't return. Elaine patted the last bulb into place, wiped her gloves on her jeans, and stood. "You didn't even flinch," Marcia said, impressed. Elaine turned toward the front porch. "Didn't feel anything worth reacting to." As they headed back inside, the late afternoon sun caught the edge of something lying in the flower bed near the porch steps. The wrench. Elaine had forgotten she'd left it out there. It lay half-covered in mulch and leaves, handle still caked with oil from the garage, glinting faintly like it had been watching the whole time. She bent, picked it up, and brushed the dirt from its head. Marcia raised an eyebrow. "Thinking of going old school?" Elaine smiled, cradling it like something sacred. "Only if I have to." The waiting room smelled like old carpet and lemon disinfectant. Elaine sat with her hands folded over a manila folder on her lap, spine straight, ankles crossed. She wore her navy cardigan, the one with the buttons she'd re-stitched herself last winter, and a fresh coat of lipstick that didn't ask for compliments. Across the room, a TV on mute played a loop of weather warnings and community announcements. Behind the front desk, a receptionist typed without looking up. A clock on the wall ticked like it was winding down something more important than time. When the door finally opened, a tall man in wire-rimmed glasses stepped into view. Dr. Cameron Reese. Court-appointed, quiet-eyed, 40-something, with the calm voice of someone who dealt in truths people didn't want to hear. "Mrs. Porter," he said, offering a professional smile, "I appreciate you being on time." "I always am," Elaine replied, rising smoothly to her feet. They walked down a narrow hallway lined with framed degrees and muted art prints. His office was warm, over-decorated, and faintly herbal from whatever calming oil he had misting in the corner. The desk was clear, except for a notepad and a glass of water. Elaine didn't need either. She took the chair across from him. "Before we begin," he said, sliding a small recorder across the desk, "this is a standard competency assessment. The court asked for it as part of an evidentiary response. You're not on trial. This is just a conversation." Elaine nodded once. "Let's talk." For the next hour, she answered every question with clarity and restraint. She recalled names, dates, addresses, her late husband's social security number, and the year the Ford plant switched to robotics. She recited the terms of her trust by memory, the medical dosage of her blood pressure meds, and her reasons, not emotions, for excluding Melissa from her will. She did a backward countdown by sevens, repeated a list of random words after 5 minutes, identified every president she'd lived through in order, and recited the recipe for her cherry cobbler by heart when asked to describe a multi-step process. Dr. Reese asked, "Do you know why your daughter requested this evaluation?" Elaine leaned forward just slightly, the corner of her mouth twitching. "Because people who don't get their way tend to blame someone else's mind before they blame their own character." He blinked, then scribbled something quickly in his notes. When it was over, he clicked off the recorder and extended his hand. "I appreciate your candor." Elaine smiled, firm and controlled. "I've had nothing but time to practice." 2 weeks later, the courtroom smelled like wood polish and old tension. Melissa sat at the plaintiff's table, done up in her most demure beige outfit, looking like a woman auditioning for sympathy. Kyle wasn't with her. A young attorney in a wrinkled suit sat beside her, flipping through notes like they held some version of the truth that might bend the law. Elaine sat across from them, hands calm in her lap. Harold was beside her, glasses perched low, expression unreadable. Marcia sat a few rows back in the gallery, arms crossed, daring someone to breathe wrong. Judge Lunsford, a no-nonsense woman with gray hair in a tight twist, reviewed the report in silence. Then she looked up. "This evaluation is thorough, impartial, and conclusive," she said, voice clipped. "There is zero evidence of cognitive decline, undue influence, or impaired decision-making. In fact, I'd trust this woman to manage my own estate." Melissa's mouth fell open. Petition to challenge the will is denied, the judge continued, already moving to the next docket number. Case dismissed with prejudice. Gavel. Done. Elaine stood, nodded to the clerk, and walked out without looking back. In the hallway, Marcia wrapped an arm around her. You didn't just win, she said. You buried them. Harold caught up a moment later, patting Elaine's shoulder with a rare smile. They thought you'd fold. You walked through them. Elaine exhaled slowly. The courthouse air felt thinner, cleaner now. Let them keep trying, she said. I've still got oxygen to spare. Elaine stood in her driveway with paint in her hair, bright red, thick, slapped across the front steps and splattered down the siding like a tantrum someone couldn't bear to finish. The words, thief and bitch, had already started to drip, their fury losing shape in the morning sun. She was wearing rubber gloves and a denim apron now, scrubbing the front stoop with a bristle brush like she was just cleaning off pollen. Her breath was steady. Her hum, low and tuneless, filled the air like the sound of someone polishing something they intended to keep. Marcia stood a few feet back, phone in hand, recording in silence. For the record, she said after a minute, you look badass. Elaine didn't stop scrubbing. I look 80 and annoyed. Well, Marcia replied, zooming in, both can be true. By the time the police arrived, most of the porch was clean again. A tired-looking officer in mirrored shades stepped out of the cruiser and took a long look at the scene before glancing at Marcia's phone. You get footage of anyone? Just the aftermath, Marcia said. But it was her. You know it was. Elaine didn't answer. She stood up slowly, cracked her back, and pulled off her gloves. The officer made a few notes, took a couple of photos, and opened another vandalism report. This is the second time now, he said gently. You want to press charges? Elaine looked down at the red paint pooling in the cracks of her front walk, then at her hands, steady, unshaken. No, she said. Let her keep wasting paint. I'll keep buying soap, Harold called that afternoon. She's unraveling, he said after Elaine filled him in. You have every right to pursue charges. I'm not interested in a courtroom where she gets to cry for attention, Elaine said flatly. She wants a stage. I want peace. There was a pause on the line. Then what do you want to do? Elaine glanced out the window, watching a squirrel inspect the tulip beds she and Marcia had planted the week before. I'm going to the bank. The teller at Franklin Community Credit Union knew her by name. She always had. Elaine made the donation in person, signature perfect, check crisp. Another $10,000 to the Elaine Porter Rising Artists Fund, this time earmarked for musical equipment, after the director at the Arts Center mentioned they'd had to borrow violins from a high school across town. That evening, the local paper ran a piece with a photo of her handing the envelope to the program director. Retired Auto Worker Fund Student Futures. Elaine didn't smile for the camera, but the pride was unmistakable. She cut out the clipping and pinned it to the fridge. Not out of vanity, just a reminder. That names could mean something better, that legacies didn't have to be inherited. Marcia came over with a six-pack and no agenda. They sat at the kitchen table with the window cracked, letting in the scent of wet mulch and thawing soil. Melissa's losing it, Marcia said. That paint job? Pure desperation. She's trying to reclaim a version of me that never belonged to her, Elaine said, sipping her tea. You ever think about talking to her again? Marcia asked. I mean, after all this? Elaine didn't answer right away. Her gaze drifted to the wrench on the sill, now polished and resting atop the folded copy of her will. I think about it, she said eventually, but then I remember. She never came for me, only for what I built. Marcia nodded slowly. So what now? Elaine looked down at her hands. Clean, no paint, no blood, just her own. I build something else. The letter arrived 3 days later. Plain envelope, no return address. Elaine knew who it was from the moment she saw the handwriting. Still angular, still rushed, still convinced she was owed the last word. She opened it over the sink, just in case it came with glitter or bile. But there was only a single page. Typed, cold. Notice of filing, Joint Chapter 13, Bankruptcy, Petitioners, Melissa Porter and Kyle Sampson, filed March 14, 10:47 a.m. Elaine stared at it for a moment, then she folded it in half and fed it into the shredder without ceremony. The machine hummed briefly, then silence again. Peace, reclaimed one page at a time. Elaine didn't dress to be seen. She wore a simple gray blouse and her weathered trench coat, the one with the inside pocket stitched shut from years ago when she'd kept losing pens. Her shoes were polished, but not new. Her hair was tied back with a clip she'd had since before Melissa could walk. The federal courthouse was newer than she expected: glass panels, brushed steel railings, and too much air conditioning. But the waiting room outside Bankruptcy Courtroom 4B still smelled like anxious sweat and burnt coffee. She sat near the back. No one noticed her. She hadn't told Harold she was going, didn't tell Marcia until they were already parked. It wasn't vengeance she was after, just verification. If someone was going to bury their life in debt, Elaine felt she should know what it looked like. Inside, the benches were half filled with strangers. Most stared at their knees. Some held folders tight to their chests like life jackets. When Melissa and Kyle entered, heads high, shoulders set like they were walking into a photo shoot, Elaine didn't flinch. Kyle wore a blazer that didn't quite fit. Melissa had dressed in courtroom beige again, but this time it hung on her wrong, too loose at the collar, too tight in the sleeves. She clutched a binder thick with receipts and financial statements, though her hands trembled when the trustee called their name. They approached the table. Elaine leaned back just enough to avoid their line of sight. Marcia, sitting beside her in oversized sunglasses and chewing mint gum like a spectator at a high-stakes poker game, leaned over and whispered, "That blazer's seen better debt." A clerk read the petition aloud. Elaine listened in silence. $42,000 in credit card debt, $18,000 in unpaid property taxes, $79,000 on a second mortgage for a house they no longer lived in, $112,000 in personal loans, outstanding car leases, back rent on an office suite, and a still unresolved lien on Kyle's LLC, which had ceased operations the year before. It was a flood of numbers dressed up as excuses. Elaine didn't smile. She didn't blink. She simply absorbed. Melissa sat straight, head high, pretending not to care. Kyle avoided eye contact with the trustee, mumbling his answers like a man still convinced he deserved applause for trying. Marcia whispered again, tone dry. "Looks like their dime's gone too." Elaine didn't respond. She waited 10 more minutes. Then, without a sound, she rose from her bench, gathered her coat over her arm, and walked out before the trustee could even reach the next question. The hallway outside was brighter than it had any right to be. Elaine walked slowly, savoring the click of her heels against the tile. It wasn't pride she felt, not revenge either. Just clarity, a quiet affirmation that some debts couldn't be paid in money. When she stepped outside, the air was warmer than it had been all week. The clouds were thinning. The courthouse steps were still damp from the morning rain, but she didn't rush. Marcia followed a beat behind, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "I thought I'd feel worse," Elaine said softly. Marcia didn't answer right away, then, "Because you didn't cause it." Elaine nodded. "And I don't have to carry it." By the time they reached the car, her phone buzzed. It was Harold. She answered with a quiet, "Yes." "I just got confirmation," he said. "The estate, the trust, your amendments, it's all sealed. Nothing can be challenged again, not by her or anyone. It's finished, Elaine. Forever." Elaine stared at a cracked spot in the pavement. A single tulip had pushed through beside it, out of season and defiant. "Thank you, Harold," she said. He paused. "I hope this gave you peace." "It gave me choice," she replied, "and I'll take that over peace any day." Harold chuckled. "Remind me never to cross you." She smiled faintly. "You're too useful." They hung up. Marcia pulled the car around and opened the passenger door. "You want to get pie?" Elaine tilted her head. "Cherry?" "Obviously." As they drove off, neither of them looked back at the courthouse. They didn't need to. The only thing behind them now was someone else's debt. And ahead, just clean, open road. The tulips were in bloom, fat with color, bruised purples, bold oranges, the kind of red that didn't apologize. They lined the edge of Elaine's garden like an audience standing for something that had taken its time arriving. She knelt in the soft dirt with her sleeves rolled up and her palms dusty, easing weeds out by the root, careful not to disturb the bees. They buzzed between blossoms with purpose, unbothered by her presence. Like they knew she belonged here, too. The sun was warm on her shoulders. The breeze smelled like cut grass and honeysuckle, and for the first time in years there was no ticking clock behind her chest, just the quiet rhythm of life not owed to anyone else. She heard the screen door creak open behind her, Marcia's voice carried like sunshine. "You want the bad news or the pie first?" Elaine didn't turn. "Depends on the pie." "Peach bourbon." "Then save the bad news for someone who still cares." Marcia walked over and plopped down on the porch steps with a groan. "My hip's mad at me, but this pie doesn't care." Elaine brushed her hands off and sat beside her, still holding a fistful of pulled weeds. Marcia handed her a slice wrapped in wax paper. "Freedom tastes sweet." Elaine took a bite and closed her eyes. "Damn, it really does." The mail came an hour later. A brown envelope stamped from the county office and addressed in Nina's clean, slanted handwriting. Elaine opened it at the kitchen table while Marcia washed pie tins and hummed something off-key. Inside, a crisp, final copy of the full estate packet, bound with a navy ribbon and embossed with the county seal. Elaine turned the first page slowly, almost reverently. The Elaine Porter Rising Artists Fund, amended and finalized. Below it, signatures, witnesses, the invisible weight of finality in black ink. She closed the folder and ran her fingers over the cover like she was feeling the grain of a memory. That evening, the Arts Center opened its doors for the first student showcase. Elaine arrived without fanfare, without announcement. She took a seat near the back, coat folded in her lap, eyes sharp beneath soft gray bangs. The building smelled like possibility. Paint, varnish, popcorn from the hallway vending machine. One by one, the students performed. A girl with braces played a cello solo that brought someone in the front row to tears. A boy in scuffed sneakers unveiled a canvas taller than he was, abstract and alive. A trio of girls read a poem they'd written together about growing up in a town that expected less of them than they planned to give. Elaine didn't cry. She didn't clap too loud, but her chest was full of something earned. The program director found her after the show. "I can't tell you what this night meant," the woman said, voice trembling with honest gratitude. "What you've made possible." Elaine just smiled. "Don't thank me. Thank the girls who refused to wait for permission." The director nodded, eyes glassy. "Will we see you again next season?" Elaine tilted her head. "I'll be here, even if you don't." Back home, the sun had dipped low behind the rooftops. The tulips were closed for the night, their heads bowed like they'd done their job and could rest. Elaine stepped onto her porch and looked out across the lawn, her lawn, where no one else would plant flags or post signs or hang price tags. Inside, she poured herself a small glass of bourbon and walked to the kitchen window. The wrench still sat on the sill, polished now. No longer just a tool, a relic, a reminder. She picked it up and held it in her hands for a long moment. Marcia joined her quietly, setting a candle on the counter without saying a word. Outside, the night deepened. But inside, the light stayed steady. Elaine didn't need to explain what had happened. Some legacies are written in blood, some are written in ink, and some are written in what you refuse to surrender. She looked out into the dark and whispered, more to herself than anyone else, "They thought I wouldn't hear. But I heard every word, and I answered with steel."